Good afternoon, distinguished scholars, colleagues, students, and friends. It's with deep honor and joy that I welcome you again to Panel 4, Research and Mentorship, part of this historic conference marking the 70th anniversary and birthday of our distinguished honorary Professor Paul Tiyambe Zeleza. This panel explores one of the most profound aspects of Professor Zeleza's legacy, his role as a mentor and intellectual guide about which most of us here can speak, particularly in shaping generations of African and diaspora scholars. His contributions to knowledge are not only found in his voluminous writings or high-profile institutional leadership, but also in the lives and careers he has nurtured. Today's reflections bring that mentorship to light in deeply personal and intellectual ways. Professor Zeleza's enduring commitment to reversing the African brain drain through diasporic collaboration and scholarly empowerment is particularly well known. He has not only written extensively on the subject, but has catalyzed concrete institutional mechanisms such as the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program. This initiative alone has placed over 600 African-born scholars in partnership with African universities, with far-reaching ripple effects in research, teaching, and policy. So today we begin our panel with Dr. David Mwambari, Associate Professor at KU Leuven University in Belgium. In his presentation titled Reflections on Professor Zeleza's Scholarship and Mentorship, Dr. Mwambari offers a rich account that blends personal testimony with scholarly analysis. He trusts how Professor Zeleza's commitment to diaspora engagement, African migration studies, and decolonial higher education has shaped not only his own academic journey, but also broader Pan-African scholarly networks. His reflections, grounded in lived experiences and institutional memory, showcase how Professor Zeleza's vision has advanced transformative academic leadership and intergenerational mentorship. Following Dr. Mwambari, we'll hear from a group of distinguished emerging scholars here at Howard, who has been also deeply influenced by Professor Zeleza's intellectual and ethical leadership and example. Chidima, Chidoka, who will explore the power of Zeleza's edited volumes, the roots of African conflicts and the resolution of African conflicts, and how his perspective on resolving conflicts in African way could help us grapple with complexities of conflict in Africa through a lens of historical understanding and local agency. Asare will reflect on Zeleza's continuing impact on diaspora studies and how his insights continue to motivate scholars to think globally while remaining anchored in African realities. Hellen Maleche will discuss the interdisciplinary nature of Professor Zeleza's legacy in Africa-centered knowledge production and on particularly African education, focusing on the book, Africa and the Disruptions of 21st Century, the ongoing decolonization of knowledge and working together to place Africa strategically in the global knowledge. And finally, Amarte Laria will examine Zeleza's influence on epistemology and knowledge production, particularly within African higher education institutions, engaging pressing themes such as digital transformation and AI, artificial intelligence from African-centered lens. Together, these voices illuminate the living legacy of Professor Zeleza, not only through theory, but through practice, pedagogy, and presence. As we begin, let's listen with attention and appreciation to the depths of mentorship and scholarship that this panel seeks to honor. Let's now begin with Dr. Mwambari. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Habari. Very good. Finally, some Swahili in this house. So I had a longer paper and I chopped it completely. because I realized that, a lot of things have been said. So I'm just going to focus on the mentorship. Thank you very much for the introduction. Fellow panelists, it's a pleasure to share a platform with you. So I am jet-lagged, and as a storyteller, I'm going to request your company in delivering this speech, if you will. I will tell you 4 stories this afternoon to show how Professor Paul Zeleza has mentored scholars around the world that have gone on to mentor others, but also to occupy a position of influence around Africa and the world. And I'm here, privileged, to testify on behalf of thousands of those who are around the world who are not here, that he has either taught, mentored in the last 4 decades that we are here celebrating. So the first thing I wanted to request you to do with me, if you may, is just to say very loud, Happy birthday! Happy birthday! Thank you very much. You are fantastic. This is great. You realize it's the afternoon, huh? So we have to do a few things to go together, to journey together. Huh? So I told you how many stories? 4. Excellent. So my mentor and now ancestor, the Kenyan-American poet Michere Mugo, taught me that in many African cultures where there is a practice to call and respond when communicating within a community. I therefore have inherited her practice to use what she used to use as ashe ashe. And that means that every time I say ashe ashe, if you agree with me, or you disagree, or you're falling asleep, you just say, oh, your neighbor is falling asleep, you just say ashe ashe. Can we practice? Ashe ashe. Thank you. That's the first story. The second story, in this paper, I use personal anecdotes that gestures towards Professor Zeleza's contribution to higher education through mentorship, which, though less visible than his celebrated published works, has been fundamental in shaping the intellectual trajectories of the next generation of young African scholars. I first met Professor Paul Zeleza and Professor Cassandra Veni at the commencement of their tenure at the USIU in Kenya. We had been introduced by a mutual colleague, Professor Beth Whitaker, who knew we were both returning to USIU, Africa. I had just completed my PhD in Australia, and as a Pan-African, I wanted to go back home. Something happened along the way. And Professor Zeleza was coming from Quinnipiac to assume the position of as Vice-Chancellor. Of course, I had prior engagement with Professor Zeleza's academic work while undertaking my master's degrees at USIU and Syracuse University. Though I was nervous during our first meeting at his office, he expressed joyful, enthusiastic curiosity about my personal life and professional ambitions. He asked many questions, always with a smile, putting me at ease and prompting me to ask questions of my own that seemed very childlike in their sincerity. For instance, how can I publish like you? How do I start? How can I approach the journals, book series, book publishers? At the time, my laptop was a graveyard of research papers and had embargoed my PhD in Australia for fear that it contained analysis that could potentially be misread because I had written about sensitive topic of memory politics in a particular country I will not mention now. I mentioned this personal encounter because it is not to be taken for granted. Many senior colleagues can really make young colleagues feel less than, and they forget they were all once ambitious, young, naive, all full of childlike questions. This is an important quality we can all learn from Professor Zeleza's approach in mentoring. I strive to deal with similar principles I learned from him, and as others mentioned in my speech letter, that I have accumulated some sort of power now in European institution. I can also mentor others. Ashe, ashe. I tell you, I'm usually much better when I'm not jet lagged. I can tell you that. Now, let me tell you one of my favorite quotes from Professor Zeleza's paper that he spoke about in 2019, February 2019, while addressing graduate students from across Africa at the USIU. At the courtesy, the workshop was held by Africa Peace Building Network. And these are the words that I read later. I was not in that lecture, but I read up to now everything he has written ever since I met him, including his books. Our intellectual, these are words he uses that I find very difficult to pronounce, proclivities. I usually do this when he's not there, but now he's there, I feel a bit pressure. Often reflect our times, prevailing ideologies and struggles, dominant intellectual traditions, and institutional context. In short, much of our individual scholarship is enmeshed in specific historical geographies, current political economies, and generations' aspiration and anxieties. Ashe. I found this was so profound that I started my recently published book with them to explain my positionality, how it's layered as a diaspora scholar, studying a particular context that I'm far from, because it is true that he is really the first one to summarize it for me, that what you do as an intellectual matters, and it is related to generational challenge, to the context you are in, and to your location. So that was the second story. How many stories did I say I was going to do? Fantastic. Let's go for the third one. Professor Zeleza shared two critical lessons that I practiced to date. And this was in one of his meetings I went to knock on his office. First thing is the pipeline. Now we are talking about how do you publish. He said, create a pipeline. First, he patiently explained that I would have to read other authors' works to learn how to structure papers and appreciate diverse writing styles. He underscored the need to create what he called a pipeline before I could master both writing and publishing skills. The pipeline would be a space to store my drafts and then see them through as I submit and track them through the publication process. I did exactly that, revisiting his articles and began to systematically send manuscripts to publishers. Although I had completed 2 manuscripts, my first publications came out in 2017 because I had held on them for fear of the opaque, intimidating world of academic publishing. I also lacked the confidence to navigate the process and felt the need to seek the guidance of a seasoned scholar rather than searching online or working on my own. Another occasion with Professor Emmanuel Achiopong, who was visiting from Harvard, they told me, make sure you have your own writing style. This is the best advice I've ever gotten. In a way that when people read what you write, they will know it is your voice and style. So this was such an important advice, especially because English is one of my many languages I speak and write in. I gained freedom in that meeting to write with proverbs, to work with names where I'm explaining some historical factors. And basically did what Chinua Achebe said. I have been given this language, meaning English, and I tend to use it. And I've done exactly that in my book, forcing Oxford University Press to publish a book recently that they thought was not worthy of their publication. But I gained a lot of confidence through this dialogue with senior scholars. The second thing, apart from the pipeline, which I created and has created marvelous miracles over the last few years, and therefore changed my career because publishing is key. Courage to publish. So the second pivotal moment in my career also came with Zeleza's personal story. On one of my many visits to report the positive progress of the pipeline to his office, I mentioned that I was quite apprehensive about publishing the memory politics manuscript for my PhD. He shared a personal story of how his family member in Malawi faced challenges from powerful people because of his writing and offered no false reassurances about the risks that accompany the publication of sensitive material to your homeland, sometimes depending on the processes that are ongoing in your country. Later on, it was Dr. Godwin Murunga and Professor Fumiro Nishakin who also confirmed that such challenges are integral to our responsibilities as scholars. Such assurance from senior scholars allowed me to have a voice and to have confidence and to take risks that come sometimes with research, writing, and thinking. Again, I was a young, ambitious scholar who wanted to write, dream, research, and secure a place in academia. I told myself, as I still do now, that I was born to teach, research, and write with or without compensation. After his advice and support I received from the Africa Leadership Center and Codestria, later, I managed to publish what had been my dream. So Professor Zeleza, when he came to SIU, every time he introduced anyone who visited, who is an academic, he talked about their publication. This was such a change I cannot explain. Usually there is things you did in the policy, things you did. He would always read that person and then say what that person has contributed to knowledge production. And he always be ready with a paper. Not an introduction, small papers, no. He would do a historical perspective of even that person and their work and their publication. So it really gave me a vision as a young person, as many of us, not just me, but it gave us a vision on what does it mean actually to take your work seriously as somebody who is in academia. And this sort of exchange and struggle led to my publication of Navigating Cultural Memory, a book published in 2023, and that has now won 2 international awards. Can you imagine what would have happened if I did not go to Zeleza's office? Or if he had brushed me off his very busy schedule? At the time, that included high-level meeting with ministers, CEOs, senior professors, and international leaders seeking to form partnerships with USIU after his arrival. When he arrived to USIU, everybody flocked in. They just wanted a partnership with this university that Professor Paul Zeleza was going to lead. During my 2-year tenure at USIU, I served on a number of committees that allowed me to learn from Professor Zeleza, and I was honored to co-design a course with him on African international relations. It was under his leadership I also co-chaired a committee that hosted the Toyini Falola conference, after which Professor Falola and Professor Zeleza encouraged me and others to collect papers and co-edit a volume on what became Beyond History, African Agency in Development, Diplomacy, and Conflict Resolution, published by Roman and Littlefield in 2020. They both literally held our hands as we navigated the processes of coordinating of chapters from around Africa, all the way to publication, a process that took 3 years. I think this kind of commitment is rare. Ashe, ashe. And so I tell these stories to underscore 2 points, amongst many I can underscore. For some of our contributors, this was the first time they published in an international book, and we're thankful for the opportunities. You can easily see that when you see Professor Zeleza's publication record, he has uplifted many early career scholars, either by collaborating with them, co-publishing with them, and also editing volumes and editing special issues and serving also on journals. I personally don't know how he does it. The second point I want to, and so that's being a good colleague, but also being a good senior colleague at different levels you are on, always looking down to uplift others. Professor Zeleza's work is not merely theoretical. I stand as one of many he directly supported through his mentorship and his amazing ability to educate and inspire both in the print and in the person. So I am going to also mention that there are a couple of people who told me to mention them because of how he really transformed their lives. Dr. Minde, Dr. Fatma Ali, Dr. Munyi Elijah, who he really instructed also and helped them uplift their careers. Ashe, ashe. How many stories did I say I was going to say? 4. How many are these? 4. I've done 3. I don't know where you're getting the 4th. All right, that means it's getting boring, so let me write it down. Even though my minutes are not finished, I just have to. Sorry? 3 minutes? I'm winding down because, they forgot the stories. Well, this is the 4th story. Ashe, ashe. So you've all heard about this fellowship that brought African diaspora scholars. So because I was so enthusiastic, I just grabbed everything that Professor Zeleza brought. It was the way it was. And so one of those was an opportunity to host Professor Pei Soyinka Airewele from Ithaca College, who came to USIU. I had to go back and dig a little bit to the USIU archive, where they wrote that Professor Pei Soyinka from Ithaca College will work closely with Dr. David Mwambari on growing research capacity and output, as well as mentor graduate and doctoral international relations students. And in this interaction with Professor Pei, with Professor Fatuma, with Professor Munyi, and many other academics, we were able to organize a lot of workshops. We were able to create relationships. I think she spent 3 months with us. But what I came to learn later is the numbers that you mentioned. Those numbers have people behind them. Those are African diaspora scholars who wanted to go back home to contribute sometimes to their own countries, but also sometimes to the continent in other ways. And his vision put that in motion. And so the last lesson I learned from that program and that I've carried on is that if you have ideas, you better be good at fundraising. You have to find the money. And that was my challenge. And again, I was very, very fortunate to win one of the biggest European grants that has basically given me a job, but also ability to hire 26 scholars in Africa for a kind of project that I'm running. Thanks to Professor Zeleza, literally, who showed me this is how it goes, this is how it goes. But also all of us need mentors. We need people to aspire to, we need people to look up to, and we need doers. And Professor Zeleza, you have been that. It is such a privilege to fly here to tell you, we honor you, and thank you so much.
Ashe, Ashe. So thank you so much, David. So that project, which I just mentioned the number, it also, we know from the accounts, it generated hundreds of millions of dollars for education and projects for Africa. Yeah, so I would like to invite Chidi for the next presentation. What? Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Dr. Zeleza, and happy birthday. It is a privilege on my part to be part of this panel, celebrating your influence. Interestingly, I got introduced to your work as a master's student when I was getting my master's in international peace and conflict resolution and being very frustrated at what I saw people identify as roots of African conflicts, especially. And in the process, I ran into these books, edited volumes, The Roots of African Conflicts, Causes and Costs, and Resolution of the African Conflicts, Management of Conflict Resolution and Post-Conflict Reconstruction. Imagine my excitement when, I think it was within 1 month of starting our program, and I heard Dr. Zeleza was coming to Howard. I was overjoyed. So I encountered the first volume, and I was in the preliminary stages of designing a project, a research project on post-colonial state building in Central and East Africa. It was actually Rwanda. And my understanding of conflict in Africa at the time, although growing, was heavily shaped by mainstream narratives that sometimes lacked nuance. I knew there were deeper and structural issues at play, like legacies of colonialism, interplay of ethnicity and politics, and even uneven economic development, but I didn't have a cohesive analytical framework. That volume helped me see the need for a deeper historical excavation. And the collection of essays in that book pointed to the many layers of conflict, the colonial engineering of political boundaries that we always talk about, and resource competition, of course, aggravated by external interventions. One of the key lessons I drew from those essays was the importance of mapping out how colonial powers set the stage for many of today's structural inequities that we see on the continent. And I began to trace how colonial economic policies favored certain groups over others. Something else I learned from there was the cost-benefit lens. When we think of cost of conflict, most times we tend to think about it just in terms of monetary and economic costs. But the broader framing, I saw that, I think one of the speakers earlier today talked about it, when, as a Nigerian, when we talk about the stigmatization of certain ethnic groups and how it continues to affect how they engage in their governments. So this broader framing encouraged me to expand my data collection beyond purely economic or political indicators. Something else that I learned from Dr. Zeleza's work was intersectional analysis. It's also something else I engaged heavily in from the African Studies Department. And I understood the interconnected nature of conflict triggers: gender, ethnicity, class, generation, geography, and how all of those issues or factors intersect. It taught me to bring in a multidisciplinary perspective, and it enriched my research design. So, the first volume, it guided me to adopt a more layered and historically grounded lens when I looked at a conflict. The second volume, The Resolution of African Conflicts, which is really what I focus on for my dissertation, for my PhD. I'm looking at reconstruction of post-conflict societies. And I like that volume discussed, it shifted the discussion from now we're out of violence, and what do we need to rebuild societies emerging from conflicts, which I think is very important, because I see from my experience, I've seen in Middle Belt, Nigeria, you stop the conflicts, but the people are still frustrated, and there's still poverty. They are definitely going to go back into conflict. From that volume, I learned the need to localize conflict resolution. We say it all the time, how one size doesn't fit all, but it is difficult not to try to apply something you've learned somewhere else into another conflict. So from here, I liked the emphasis on community-based and locally led solutions. I liked the reference to the UN peacekeeping missions, but I learned also about how it was important to empower local actors and the recognition of indigenous conflict resolution strategies. I also saw that reconstruction must be holistic. Like I talked about, it's not just enough to stop people from fighting. There has to be a plan, especially to restart the economies of those post-conflict societies. And from the public policy perspective, I learned that I saw the second volume as a practical framework for policymakers, because that volume gave insights into transitional justice, security sector reform, and the role of civil society. On the personal side, and for my scholarly growth, it helped me refine my research questions first, and also to expand how I thought about my methodologies. More importantly, it taught me to look at African conflicts not as intractable or monolithic, because Nigeria alone, where I come from, has over 500 ethnic groups, but to look at African conflicts as a phenomenon deeply rooted in specific historical, political, and cultural contexts. Dr. Zeleza's editorial vision, for me, is a reminder of why it is important for African scholars to be at the forefront of knowledge production in Africa. His work has inspired me to center African voices and local agency in analysis of our conflicts and the aftermath of those conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chidi. Chidi is my senior here in the African Studies Department at Howard. I can only confirm that when we turn to books or volumes in certain issues in African studies, one of our usual references is Professor Zeleza's works. The next presenter in our panel is Yao.
Yeah, thank you and greetings, everybody. I am very much excited to be on this panel, and I would also want to use this opportunity to congratulate Professor Zeleza on his 70th birthday. This is indeed a significant milestone, and we ask for long life to continue showering us with the blessings of your thoughts. Thank you. And also, in honor of that, also, I'd want to read something which made me think of Prof. Zeleza as we read, and this comes from, is a text from ancient Egypt, better known as Kemet, from a scribe who was passing on these admonitions on to those who were studying under him. So he goes on to write, cherish study, avoid the dance, so you will become an excellent official. Do not yearn after outdoor pleasures, hunting and fishing. Shun boomerang throwing and the chase. Write diligently by day, recite at night. Let your friends be the papyrus roll and the scribal palette. Indeed, writing, for one who knows it, is far better than all other professions, pleasanter than bread and beer, more delightful than clothes and perfumed ointment, more precious than a legacy in Egypt, than a tomb in the West. And this made me think of Prof. Zeleza and your accomplishments in the field. Anyways, I am a scholar keenly interested in Africa and its engagements with the diaspora. The diaspora here being people of African descent located outside the continent as a result of voluntary and forced dispersals from historic to contemporary times. It is this interest that brought me in close contact with the thoughts of Dr. Zeleza. Instrumental to my study is the definition of the diaspora. Here, Dr. Zeleza shines some light on how to think of the African diaspora. He notes that the use of the word diaspora tends to be uncritical and vague. The diaspora, he informs us, is talked of mostly as a people with transnational mobility, hybridity, navigation of multiple belongings, and as a people with networks of affiliation. Professor Zeleza identifies two aspects of the diaspora, which is the historical diaspora formed before the construction of colonial and post-colonial states, as well as the contemporary diaspora whose flows from the continent is traced to the 19th century and beyond. From his discussions on the diaspora, he calls for us to see the diaspora as a process, which is one of being and becoming, as a condition which is resulting from dispersals, also in terms of space, the location of the diaspora, and also as a discourse, which is like studies as discourse in terms of like studies, like for example, being discussed here. I show on the screen two adages from the accounts of Ghana, which I use to think through what the diaspora may mean. One is an Adinkra symbol and the other a proverb. So on the left, we see Funtum Funefu Denchem Funefu, Wanefru Bomu, in Suwarididi Woko, which is to say that Siamese crocodiles have one stomach, yet they fight over food when eaten, which for me points to a connection rooted in similarity. Moreover, on the right, we would see Dufo Chidansiomu, Chesen Arakra, Erin Nane Odenchem, which is to say, no matter how long a log remains in water, it will not become a crocodile. And also for me, this speaks to how, regardless of change in location, the fundamental being in a person does not change. The log may indeed rot in the water, but it does not become a crocodile. It is in recognition of these and other complex factors which has led some governments of the continent to actively engage with the diaspora. Although Professor Zeleza may have pivoted, what would his thoughts be on recent Africa diaspora engagements? My dissertation engages with the historic diaspora in their process of return, the conditions of their experiences, the spaces in which they occupy when they return, as well as the discourse surrounding their return. Specifically, I hone in on the year of return in Ghana, which has sparked a massive wave of new diaspora engagements. This, however, is not without its controversies. Recently, an article published on Africa is a Country dubbed the recent diaspora engagement of the continent as one of elite capture masquerading as Pan-Africanism. The author, Naoli Aroni, observes succinctly that recent engagement focuses mainly on celebrities who post glamorous images, whose glamorous images, and I quote her, aid African governments to craft a progressive aspirational image that conceals deep-seated class inequalities and the dire material conditions of ordinary Africans. Here, once again, how does the diaspora and its engagement with the motherland affect the process, conditions, space, and discourse surrounding the diaspora? My research is currently in progress, and I acknowledge that discussions on the diaspora return to the continent has to be nuanced so as not to reinforce neo-colonial attitudes as well as scatter our desire for meaningful connections. But towards connection, Dr. Zeleza hints at music as being a Pan-African bridge. This was creatively explored in Ryan Coogler's recent movie, Sinners, which showed continuities in music through sacred time from African antiquity through to present. My research also delves into cultural collaborations stemming from recent Africa diaspora engagements. But I am moved by Dr. Zeleza's admonition to Africa diaspora scholars, and I quote him, "Our challenge as researchers in the field of African diaspora studies is to map out these processes and promote mutual understanding through education and communication, to encourage a strategic solidarity among our communities that comes from respect for each other's histories and struggles, and from a clear understanding of the ties that bind us as we seek to recover the ravages of the past and build new futures in a more globalized world." Indeed, my research, and by extension other Africa diaspora scholars, must have the ultimate aim towards healing. As Africa contemplates its diaspora, the pioneering works of Professor Zeleza will be foundational towards discourse in this ever-growing and important field. Also, Dr. Zeleza speaks personally to me in his discussion on the academic diaspora, and I quote him again. "The African academic diaspora," he notes, "as cultural producers have a role to play in Africanizing the Atlantic. They must resist the seductions of Northern academies to become native ventriloquists, complicit others who validate narratives that seek to marginalize Africa." In here also, I feel a call. I am inspired by this gathering to celebrate an icon in the field of African studies. To me, it speaks to the relevance of our field alongside our fragmented twin, Africana studies, especially in these times when the field is targeted and underfunded. Yes, please, we need money. We are thankful for Dr. Zeleza's contributions to the field. A saying from home says, "If you did not see your mother in her heydays, you may think your father made a mistake." I was in awe seeing Dr. Zeleza with her in the brochure. I remarked to my colleagues, "Dr. Zeleza had hair." It is endearing to see that. It is endearing to see that in the image of him behind me, in place of hair, a tree grows. And it is from this tree that we pluck some fruits for nourishment as we move on our intellectual journey. Dr. Zeleza, Yamawatirin, which is to say, we pour life on your head, and may the ancestors continue to guide your path. Ashe.
Thank you so much, Yao. That's very, very moving. The next contribution from our panel is from Hellen on African knowledge production and education, one of Professor Zeleza's favorite themes on which he has been working since decades, since before we were born, and until and which we are which we are engaging now. Hellen, please.
Good afternoon, and happy birthday, Professor. Indeed, we've been talking, and we were really privileged as a class when we were here just in 1 month that Professor Zeleza came into the Howard University. And we had the benefit of him coming into various classes that we had. And it has just been profound, and that's what I would like to talk about. I have been reading this book, amongst others. This book is called Africa and the Disruptions of the 21st Century. And many minds are thinking about the disruptions and how will Africa fit in those disruptions. Allow me to read just something small in the preface so that I can set myself up. And this is what Professor says. It was published in 2021. As I get older, I become more preoccupied counterintuitively with the future of my beloved continent, our global diaspora, and the world at large. I am keener than ever about the quality of education we are giving our young people and the mentoring that the members of my generation provide to younger scholars. I am worried about the world we have created for future generations, but I am also hopeful as I watch and witness the amazing energy, imagination, creativity, agency, and fearlessness of young people. And this really touched me because Dr. Zeleza, he personalizes his books. So as he does all the history and he does all the research, you get a snippet of the kind of person that he is. And that's why I want to focus on a few things today about how this has impacted my life here at Howard University. I specifically was reading the chapter on the decolonization of African knowledges. And in this, he says there are two areas that are of big concern. The first is the unfinished project of decolonizing African knowledges, and the second is the continent's position in global knowledge production. I am an educator, as I said before, and I have a school back in Kenya. And in Kenya, we are very happy about the kind of education we have. We call them private academies. Private academies have foreign curricula. They also have a lot of foreign interaction because that's the way you show that your school is doing well. So my first meeting with Professor Zeleza was in our class when he started talking about the 4 libraries. The 4 libraries, and he talked about the Library of the Ancient Era, the Colonial Era Library, the Post-Independence Library, and the Slave Trade Era Library. And much to my amazement, I looked at the students that I have in my school and I said, what libraries do our children engage? And this was totally disturbing to me. So it is from the time that I came into Howard, I started thinking about the curriculum for my school. So it's true that we get into partnerships and it's true that we engage in different education systems. But I told myself just from this learning that there's no excuse for a school in an African country not to have the Ancient Era Library as part of their literature. In this book, he says that there's a total need for an integrated library. And the question is asked in the book, who will undertake such a project? And many times I realize that as African nations, again, like in my school, sometimes we get donations of books from all over the world, and we're very happy because we think that we have saved some money and we have some books. And this question moved me to think that what role can I play in an integrated library? Because children that we are raising in Africa need agency. They need to know their identity. They need to know where they came from. And this is a very critical area. So I'm very glad that at such a time as this, I'm in Howard to learn about how the libraries will affect children in local schools so that they first of all understand who they are before they understand how the people came and discovered what was in their country. So this is what has really been very exciting to me. And so in this area, Professor Zeleza, before I leave Howard, I'll share with you my curriculum so that you can see what we're going to be doing. We're going to make them compulsory subjects. One of the compulsory subjects will be Africa's history, just like we have. Yes, thank you. The second one is the continent's position in global knowledge production. In this, I looked at several of Prof's volumes, and there are several, and I was looking at them and reading them, and just thinking that many of the volumes he has are from presentations he's made, keynote addresses here, and collecting the information and putting them in a book, including the one that I read. It's about speeches that he has made in different areas. Apart from that, they're creative books, they're stories, they're African storytelling. And I just thought to myself that we have no excuse not to write. And this is a big area in which we want to have an opportunity where we can raise the volume of African literature, the quality and the quantity of African knowledge production. And in this area, I was happy when Professor talked about the way he was mentored to be the pipeline and the courage to publish. This is another lesson that I have learned, that I need to really situate myself and also be a voice in terms of presenting and producing African knowledge for people to engage in. Moving on, there's an article that I read published in 2022, and it says, Africa in the 21st century, from pawn to global player. And I thought to myself, I am a global player. I'm not a pawn anymore. And thank you, yes. Yeah. And in this article published, he talks about several areas that are very key for us as Africans. And the fact is that Africa is changing now because we have quite a number of youth. I mean, we have the largest number of youth who are alive and well and ready to change the world. And also talks about the whole concept of a diaspora and engagement, talking about reimagining Pan-Africanism in the modernist era. And then lastly, talking about the digital technology and how it fuels creative expansion. And out of all these readings, when I read this and I started to think, what is it that I'd like to do for my dissertation studies and what would I like to engage in? I started to think about African digital agency. Part of the writings that Dr. Zeleza produces are about who you are, from what context are you speaking, from what lens are you speaking, what is the real history on the ground before you begin to make assertions about a certain people. And I began to see that with technology, the way it has burst forth, and the availability of technology around the world and including in Africa, Africa needs to be extremely strategic in the way they position themselves around technology and how it is utilized, so that we too can say that we have produced some information. We have not produced information for Google. We have not produced information for people to use. But Africans in and of themselves have a voice through technology. And that can only come through the frameworks that we set up, the structures of policy. It will come through engaging with the youth who are very creative and seeing exactly how do we want to work with technology with the youth and the way that they are so creative. And this being my last point is that out of this experience of interacting with scholars like Professor Zeleza, I began to realize that I almost called myself, the word is called a fake. Let me use the word fake, because I had mastered a lot of Eurocentric literature, mastered a lot of Eurocentric policy, or not policy, but theories. But when it came to me to describe what would it mean for African digital agency, it would be unfortunate if I decided to use a total framework that is foreign to Africa to create a framework. And so it is from this work that I'm drawing my insights about what kind of theoretical framework, which is Afrocentric, and will speak to us setting up our own digital agency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hellen. Last but not least, finally, Amarte will continue a conversation on education and knowledge production, particularly focusing on one emerging issue, which is also focus of Professor Zeleza's writings in the recent times, artificial intelligence, African epistemology, and knowledge production. You have 3 minutes, not more.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Paul Zeleza, happy birthday. So in the culture I come from, which is the Ga of Ghana, and also the Ashantis of Ghana, there's this recognition we give to people who have held extreme relevance in our society. In other words, people who are recognized as Onipa, which means person, are sometimes referred to as Nana. So, for instance, we call Kwame Nkrumah as Nana Kwame Nkrumah because of the legacy he had lived. today I make reference to you as Nana Paul Zeleza because of the extreme legacy you've lived. Yeah. So recently I've been thinking about an idea. The idea is I've been thinking about how can AI help to break the barrier of communication as it relates to the healthcare. Because, for instance, take US, some persons would go to the hospital and are unable to speak English or are unable to speak either English or Spanish because they come from other parts of the world and are unable to communicate effectively what exactly is happening to them. So I think about how AI can help to improve communication by translating language into several ones in order to help effective communication. And these ideas stems from two works of yours that I've engaged with. And then, so the first one is the work you have on African studies and universities since independence. And then there was also a speech you delivered during the African Indigenous Knowledge and African Language International Conference, very recent. And then these are the two things that had really influenced this idea. So with regards to your work on African studies and universities since independence, you delineated 4 distinct epistemological traditions that have emerged within African historical scholarship. That is the culturalist, the developmentalist, the globalist, and the deconstructionist. With regards to the culturalist tradition, you emphasize the study of African cultural practice, belief system, and indigenous knowledge forms, serving as the counter-narrative to colonial depictions of Africa as lacking history or sophisticated cultural tradition. With regards to the developmentalist tradition, you focused on economic development, state formation, and institutional capacity building in post-colonial context, viewing knowledge production as instrumental to national developmental goals. In relation to the globalist tradition, you situate African experiences within a broader global process, examining how Africa has been integrated in global system of trade, politics, and knowledge exchange. Then the final one, which is the deconstructionist tradition, you apply it, it's a critical theory that questions established narrative about Africa, examining how power shapes knowledge production and scrutinizes the politics of representation in academic discourse. Having said that, in the recent presentation you did during the African Indigenous Knowledge and African Language International Conference, you had a couple of things to say about AI. But some of the things that you said raised a lot of questions in my mind. And one is, who controls AI? Who decides how it is built? Who benefits from it? And whose knowledge it encodes? And I think these are very relevant questions that we could engage in, especially in the current era we find ourselves. Because the idea of AI can be used for good and can be used for bad. It can also be a means by which Africans' history and tradition would continue to be marginalized, or we can take advantage of trying to accurately tell our story as African people. So for me, these frameworks you've given is a base upon which I'm looking at this work I'm doing. Thank you so much, Father.
Thank you so much, Amarte. I'm sure there will be questions on that also from the audience. And before we proceed to, I hope we'll have some time for discussion, to questions. I just want to highlight one aspect of Professor Zeleza's work and character, which David also mentioned earlier. So beyond the accolades, of which there are many, what truly distinguishes Professor Zeleza is the character with which he has carried his brilliance. He's known not only for his discipline and punctuality, but like 6:30 in the morning, 7:30 meetings, always there, prepared, smiling and kind. So his humility, kindness, and generosity. So he mentors with care, leads with vision, listens with respect. I think everyone can speak about that. Whichever level you are, he listens with respect, he lets you speak. He has always made time for students, colleagues alike, and embodying the very spirit of collegiality in public service. So his legacy includes not only his scholarly contributions for me, but also the countless lives he has touched as teacher, mentor, administrator, and friend. He represents the best of what we aspire to be as students. Intellectually rigorous, ethically grounded, and deeply committed to the collective good. Thank you. And so we'll proceed to questions. I will have 2-3 questions for here for the panel. My first question is for David. Dr. Mwambari, in your powerful reflection on Professor Zeleza's mentorship and scholarship, you emphasized his role in reframing African diaspora studies and advancing decolonial approach to higher education. Given your personal experience as both a mentee and a scholar working across continents, how do you see Zeleza's vision of intergenerational mentorship and Pan-African scholarly networks reshaping institutional power dynamics between Africa and Euro-American academic space, because you have been there and here and there. So, well.
Thank you. So intergenerational mentorship?
Yeah.
And?
Pan-African scholarly networks, power dynamics between African and Euro-American scholarly spaces.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'll make maybe a couple of points. One is the lived reality of being a diaspora-based scholar. I do a lot of field work. At the moment, I'm running a project on refugees, and I spend a lot of time in camps in Bidibidi, Nakivare, Dadaab. These are places that you really, really have to travel. And one of the things I find is that when you deal with the community and you say you're coming from outside, there is a lot of layers you need to go through for you yourself to have a particular attitude to work with people, because the longer you stay outside a community, a context, the more you almost push towards being relevant. And so the power dynamic comes in when I think some scholars come with a lot of institutional colonial power, like, you belong to a big institution. If you say you're from America or Europe, they behave in a particular way. We can take posture to almost mimic the colonial enterprise of knowledge production. So that's one thing I think diaspora-based scholars have to be cautious about when working with the communities. The second one is with colleagues in other African universities. Again, because I do a lot of field work, one of the things I do when I'm doing research in a community, I look for a university, I email ahead of time and say, I have sets of skills, can I please contribute or come and learn, be part of a class, whatever. And you always find that the attitude, if I'm with the white colleagues, they get reception very quickly before I do. I'm happy now I have gray hair. I don't cut it anymore because it has been helping me to pass around and get some collaboration going. But otherwise, just calling up and saying you're this and you do this, it sometimes doesn't work. So we are working around some sort of coloniality that is in knowledge production, but there is also in practice, that is in nation building, that a decolonized mind has to invest in decentering themselves and understanding the processes that are going on as you form the relationships. And that's work. It's progress, because as we grow also in academia, you claim elite privileges and you almost want to cash them in when you're stuck in borders. I'm stuck often in borders because I don't tell border controls that I'm a professor. I just say I'm here, I'm going to do a workshop, and they set me down and I spend 6-7 hours. Later on they find out, okay, what do you do? And you say a professor, they all go crazy. But you have to go through a process of learning how to reach people where they are coming from and understanding systems and how they shape us, so that you don't end up oppressing people. Because I think also these titles and all this knowledge, and it can actually end up preventing you from learning from people, because the way you come with such a high, and that's something I really learned from Professor Zeleza, that even on campus when he was a vice chancellor, he didn't impose it, right? Every Thursday, was it Thursday? He used to come to offices and just say hi. And people will stand with their legs and arms, the chancellor is here, there. But you know, he came with peace just to say hello. I'm sure he was also finding out what's going on. So I think, yeah, we critique power a lot, we critique powerful elites a lot, but we forget the moment we get in those places ourselves that we are embodying coloniality and power. So you need to shed off these things of saying, you know, I'm from Europe, I'm from America. I shed them off and I say, I'm affiliated with African Leadership Center in Kenya, you know? And you get that, you know, so then you build a relationship from ground up, which I think for me is interesting as learners, because I remain a student.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to add to that. With Dr. David, I am working currently with Professor Zeleza on a project as a research assistant. And with Dr. David Mwambari, we also recruited some research assistants in the continent. And when there was a speech or a suggestion that they are paid differently than me here, and Professor Zeleza objected strongly based on his record of how scholars treated in the continent and elsewhere. So he made sure that they are paid there the same as they are paid here and elsewhere. So, my next question is for Chidi. Chidi, on your presentation on Professor Zeleza's work in the roots of African conflict and the resolution of African conflicts, you brought to attention his emphasis on historical context and local agents. How do you think can African epistemologies and traditional mechanisms of conflict resolution, those you said, which are rooted in community, consensus, and restorative justice, be meaningfully integrated into, say, the African Union's formal peace and security architecture, which often, you also said, replicates external frameworks and rather ignores the local ones.
So something I learned, something I got from the edited volumes was, simply put, context is key. In analyzing a conflict in Africa. It's very, very important to find the context. So thinking about the African Union and conflict resolution mechanisms, I would say that just what I said, it has to, each conflict has to be analyzed for its own, with its own peculiarities. So if you ask me, I'll say the African Union should avoid a one-size-fits-all. If it works in the north, if it, in the global north, if it works in the west, it can't work in Africa. So if the African Union wants to go into peacekeeping and conflict resolution, it must, within it, contain mechanisms that's able to analyze and identify the peculiar context before you can find the drivers of the conflict, before you can proffer conflict resolution suggestions that are tailored for that particular conflict. So, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. My final question is for Amartya. Amartya, in your analysis of Professor Zeleza's influence on knowledge production, especially in relation to African epistemology and AI, which is both timely and urgent. Thank you for that. Based on your presentation, what's the Zelezian perspective on how might African universities recenter in indigenous knowledge systems within the ongoing digital and AI revolution?
Thank you so much for the question. So it's really an undeniable fact that the current AI tools that we have, for instance, ChatGPT, perpetuate a certain kind of Eurocentric perspective, especially when it comes to knowledge production. So for instance, a simple search on, or when you simply search on ChatGPT, give me examples of images of people, of inmates. The kind of image it gives you are black people. And you ask the same ChatGPT or any other one, give me an image of lawyers. And the kind of image you see are not black people. So, and also when it comes to stories about Africans and the diaspora, the knowledge that you get from there is not really the reflection of what it is. But I think Nana Zeleza has already reminded us about these things already. in the sense of the Eurocentric narrative when it comes to African people. So for me, the Zelezian perspective is what he articulates in his work, which I mentioned, African Studies and Universities Since Independence, where he talks about the culturalist, the globalist, the deconstruction, all these perspectives are ways for us as African people or people of African descent to reflect on the kind of AI inventions we want to make. Because for me, I hold the view that African people or black people should have their form of AI. They should own it, especially when it questions who owns AI, what purpose does it serve, and who encodes it. These are questions that are very relevant because historically, African people and people of African descent have been exploited, and it's continuing. And AI is supposed to help us to break these inequalities, but rather it is reaffirming it. And so there's a need for us to look at AI with these Zelezian perspective I've mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Yes, we shouldn't just be consumers or onlookers, but active participants of knowledge production in this AI, artificial intelligence. So before the keynote addresses, we'll have a few minutes for questions. If anyone has questions for the panelists, please come forward.
Hello, good evening. My name is Kayla Harley. So first I want to say thank you to everyone, and I want to say in particular thank you, David, for your comment about shaking off essentially colonialism, the presence, right? Even though we are Black, Pan-African, African, we come with a presence and information and knowledge that can be intimidating and create a sense of separation. To that, what has been a theme I'm hearing in this conversation, the one before, is that capacity is limited when it comes to supervision. We know that we need to have the lived experience of research and not just the research itself. So I want to pose a double question depending on your experience. One, let's say money aside, because we all know that money and resources is the biggest hurdle. If that were not an issue, what would you say is the biggest challenge in terms of gaining an experience, a lived experience of research, and having that support, mentorship, or supervision? If it hasn't been a challenge, give an example of when you stepped up. Because we know that what's happening now is there needs to be a passing of the baton. We're needing to emerge into leadership, right? And taking on more responsibility. Maybe you've done that, and maybe you found it to be effective. Could you give an example of when that happened? You can answer either or. Thank you.
Thank you so much. David?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to mentorship, it's a relationship, right? So there is the one who wants mentorship. Sometimes some people have guts to step up, and that's a trick I learned from one time when I was hustling, trying to go to university in Kenya. I learned something from people who are training entrepreneurs. Said the best way you're gonna make it in life is one secret is to say, hey, I need help. So there are people who are like that, who know when they need help, when something hurts, they say it hurts, and then they ask. But from the time I've been teaching and also mentoring, there are people who have a problem, either because of the way you are or because of the system they are in, they just can't voice it. Sometimes this is also gendered. So they really want to come forward for mentorship, but they are concerned or worried because they are cultural. So if you're in a position of power and you know you have something to offer and you suspect somebody wants it, I think it's good to create an aura, and that's what we were saying about Professor Zeleza, of approachable, of being approachable. The stories I was telling you about approaching him, his calendars were full. Sometimes it was to sit at the reception for 5 minutes, some minutes. You know, but me, I was one of those who say I need help. But he was also on the other saying, okay, I'm also here to also mentor people. So, but there's also etiquette, of course, if somebody's very busy and you know. But I think a lot of it is push and pull. The other one that I do quite often that works is to join organizations on the continent, because for me, my concern in my life, Europe is a transaction. My dealings with Africa is transformational. And so what I do is I join other people's dreams. I've been part of, for example, Africa Leadership Center, founded by Professor Fumir Shakin and Godwin Murunga, that mentors and trains African women in peace and security. I don't have to invent a program. What I did was join them in 2000, I think it's been now 15 years. And so for twice a year, they know they can count on me to offer a course on methodology and a course on research and writing. And through that, they also partner with the University of Nairobi. But that brings people from all over Africa. Sometimes they're looking for people, you know, but I looked for them. I looked for that opportunity because this is part of my ethics. So what can you do? And the other thing in mentorship is every time you're being mentored, you can mentor somebody. Somebody you're mentoring can mentor somebody. That's the only way to do it community-wise, and it's a resource. It's a resource because you're dedicating time. So that's what I was saying. It's multi-layered, but you really have to step up and say, my calendar is busy like this, but this is the time I dedicate every month or every whatever to do this. And everybody has different gifts and talents and different resources to employ.
Thank you so much. We have like time for one question.
Thank you for the panel, everyone. Habari yako? Dr. Maleche Mzuri Sana. I wanted to know, for very personal reasons, what is the likelihood that you can get your perspective transmitted or incorporated into many schools? In other words, this issue about the archive, the library, what's being taught, if you're in school in Kenya, or your kid's in school in Kenya, and they talk about the Pearson curriculum or the Cambridge curriculum, oh, I know it well. The question becomes, what you're trying to do, will you be successful in getting that transmitted across and into many schools? Because right now, those types of schools, especially the ones in what used to be called the White Highlands, are nothing but, well, I'm not going to say nothing but they produce neo-colonialists, not deliberately, but by default because of the way they teach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I think that there's great opportunity for it to be replicated severally, but this is the beginning stage of creating the idea of having an integrated library in schools, including what literature we read, including what books children take home. So we began it in my school as a pilot program. That's what I want to do. And then I'm part of schools associations. And in these schools associations, in multiple of them at home, that's my idea of going to talk about what we're doing with the reading. And then another thing that we do as a school, that we engage in the music festivals. And so I'm thinking of those forums to sell this idea. But more than anything, we are collaborating as a core group of educators, and we're tackling different areas of education. And this is a kind of group that we want to go and speak to schools and speak to counties in our nation so that we can sell that idea and work together and have people join the group so you become a member. And then more than that, we're thinking Africa, but we've started Kenya. We're thinking Africa, but we've started Kenya, and therefore I see it as a model that can be used and just replicated in the way that that context can work with different literatures and put them together. Last thing I'd like to say is that in my course of being here at Howard, I've seen a lot of good West African literature. Sometimes our teachers are left to choose the readings. But right now, one of our ideas is that we should pick different readings from different sections of Africa so that the children not only get their identity from the histories, but also understand the peoples in the continent. So that's the kind of concept that we have, and we want it to be a model that's replicatable. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hellen. Before we conclude, I would like to say a thing or two. So as we continue to celebrate this milestone, we do not merely look back, we look forward, because Professor Zeleza is not done. He is continuing to write, teach, guide with the same vigor and clarity that have defined his career. The continent and the world remain beneficiaries of his luminous mind and unwavering dedication. On behalf of the panelists, colleagues, students, friends, and admirers across the globe, I say thank you. Thank you, Professor Zeleza. Thank you for a lifetime scholarship, service, and humanity. Happy 70th birthday. May your legacy continue to illuminate our paths. Thank you. And I would like to take the opportunity to invite Dean Dr. Williams for the next keynote address, Dean of Graduate School of Howard University. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just one quick announcement. We still have one more item, a film and dinner, 2 items in one, and it will be in the reading room, the place where we had breakfast and lunch.
Okay, so
you're all welcome.
Yeah, that means the keynote address by Dr. Williams and Mr. Olukoshi has been moved for tomorrow to tomorrow. So yeah, we'll have that tomorrow, and we'll now go to the other place for the film, Zeleza, Zones and Zests, which starts in the other place. Thank you.